We have one of the most well-known remote viewing teachers in the world with us today, and we also have a historian of remote viewing with us. Paul was part of the government program Project Stargate, and he has more information about that program than most people, even a lot of the people who are part of the program, because he's been studying the history for so long. He is an excellent teacher, and it's a great opportunity for us to have him with us today. Paul is on the board of directors of the Ryan Research Center. He was he was the president of IRVA, the International Remote Viewing Association, for I don't know how many years, but it seemed like it was a lot. Paul has been involved with many of the organizations. He's on a board of directors of the Parapsychological Association, and he is an instructor with the Ryan Education Center, and will be teaching a course coming in August on what he's calling practical precognition. Paul, thank you so much for coming here today and for being with us.
You're welcome, John. You know, I thought about maybe just driving off somewhere and giving you a heart attack, but I decided I couldn't do that. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to talk, and John, you've been a great mentor in this domain for me in terms of being involved with the Ryan and whatever, and what a great organization it is. So I appreciate this opportunity, and just to let you know, I'm gearing this talk towards obviously for people who don't really know a lot about remote viewing, for I guess you could say entry-level folks. But that doesn't mean there isn't going to be material here that those of you who've been around for a long time won't find interesting. I think that there's something here for everybody. So let's start out. Remote viewing, and of course, right now, it doesn't work. Okay, there we go. Remote viewing, what it is. And there's, of course, a lot of things that you hear and see about remote viewing out there, particularly in the internet community. Hopefully, this will kind of give you a baseline from which to judge and understand this topic from. So I'm going to start off with a story. It happened in Africa in March of 1979, specifically Zaire, which is currently one of the Congos, or maybe the Congo. Names tend to change in Central Africa from time to time. The Russians were missing an airplane. It so happened that the CIA had paid a Libyan pilot. The plane that was missing had been based in Libya, and they had paid a Libyan pilot to steal the airplane and fly it to some undisclosed location. I speculate it was probably South Africa. This was a Tu-22 bomber, but it had been outfitted as a reconnaissance aircraft, and it was loaded with high-tech and highly secret cryptological equipment, spy gear, all that kind of thing. Just the kind of juicy thing that the CIA would love to get their hands on. And of course, the Soviets were longing for the same thing, except in the other direction from us. But this time, there was some success. The pilot stole the plane, but he got cold feet. And somewhere over Africa, he bailed out and left the plane on autopilot. And when it ran out of gas, it crashed. The CIA knew roughly where it might have gone down within several thousand square miles, but they couldn't find it. Their satellites just weren't picking it up. We found out later because it went in kind of perpendicular into the ground, and it had gone into the triple canopy jungle. This is not the plane. This just shows you what it might look like there. And in fact, roughly maybe in the country of Zaire. You can see it's a pretty good sized place. So failing technical means of finding it, the CIA asked a remote viewer, essentially, a young Air Force enlisted woman, to use her ESP abilities. She was working with a gentleman named Dale Graff, some of you may know him, to try and locate the wreckage. They gave her a map of the entire continent of Africa and said, it's on here, it's down here somewhere. And in the process, she went through whatever process was, and in the end, she drew a small circle on the ground that covered about 3 square miles. And the embassy sent in a special ops team to try and see if they could actually find it. And as they were going in, they met natives coming out carrying pieces of Tu-22 Soviet bomber. So the airplane was recovered. We don't know anything more about the story since then for obvious reasons. but we do know the plane was recovered. And in fact, this is going to be a bit of a, so they found the aircraft in the circle. I'm going to try something here. We'll see if the tech works. Jimmy Carter, former President Carter, who was president at the time, actually confirmed that this happened. Now, he remembered it a little vaguely, didn't have all the facts down exactly, but the bones of it are here. And this was about 20 years after the event. And he said this.
The only strange and inexplicable event that I have that has been discussed publicly is that one time we had a small plane go down somewhere in Africa. And we needed very much to find out where that plane had crashed. And we were not able to find it by surveillance from our satellites. Mm-hmm. So the director of the CIA, he was also director of all the intelligence agencies, heard about a woman in California that was a medium or something. I don't know the title for. And he contacted her, and she gave him the latitude and longitude of the plane's whereabouts. And the next time one of our space satellites went over that area, we located the plane where she said it was. And that's the only time that I have ever experienced something that was inexplicable while I was president.
I think it's kind of funny that he specified when he was president. So anyway, yeah, as I said, he got the details a little bit wrong, but the general bare bones of it, he got right. And I say he got it wrong. It may well be he told the story that way to kind of camouflage some of the actual facts about it, that he was still being cautious about. It's hard to say. Anyway, so what is remote viewing? This is a kind of a quick sort of a definition of it. It's the act or the process of receiving real impressions, concepts, and sensory data from a distant or hidden target using only the powers of the mind alone. In other words, it's a form of ESP or extrasensory perception. It is a learned skill. Pretty much anybody can learn it. It's based on an innate ability that you and I and just about everybody else has. But it does depend on following the correct principles and a lot of practice to develop consistency and accuracy in the process. So some things it isn't. Now, people get kind of confused about this. You'll often hear people say, well, remote viewing is just X or remote viewing is just Y. And that just shows that they need a little bit of education on what remote viewing actually is. It is not channeling. It does not require the involvement of any discarnate entities. It doesn't require that you have any spirit guides or anything like that. I'm not saying those things don't exist. I'm saying they aren't relevant to the remote viewing process. It isn't astral projection or out-of-body experience. Now, there may be a relationship between these, but there's a significant difference as well. And if you're curious about this, I have a blog article out there, and I should have probably linked it. But at any rate, I go into this in detail about how they're different, but how they might be in some ways connected. It is not, as I like to say, video in the head. This is kind of the Hollywood version of being psychic, and including remote viewing. It isn't like you have a video or a film spooling out in your head where you see everything just like you were seeing it kind of in real time. It's not at all like that. I'll explain a bit more what it is like as we go. All right. So remote viewing results. So when you get the results of a remote viewing session, as we call it, those include written and verbal, so words, include sketched, and that's an important element in it, and sometimes even clay model responses. I'll show you here in a little bit a clay model result and some sketch results as well. And remote viewing requires that you follow a certain protocol. You could think of a protocol as a set of rules that you have to follow it for it to be considered true remote viewing. There's a lot of people out there that do what they call remote viewing, But if it doesn't follow this protocol, at least as the originators of remote viewing are concerned, it doesn't really count as pure remote viewing. These rules or protocol are as follows. A remote viewer may not be told anything about this target until they're done with the session. This is what we call a blind condition. The viewer is blind to the target. Further, nobody who has anything to do with the remote viewer before that session begins is supposed to know anything about the target. They're also supposed to be blind. We call this a double blind condition. And in science, in a science experiment with remote viewing and in operational remote viewing, this is essential. This is an essential ingredient. When you're involved in training, sometimes it'll be single blind, particularly early on as the viewer's trying to learn the process, as the student is trying to learn the process. But for all the really significant kind of remote viewing events, it should be double blind, where neither the viewer nor anyone else they come in contact with should know anything about the target until after all the remote viewing process is over. The target data must be verifiable. I know there's lots of folks out there who love, somebody's calling me, who love to remote view like UFOs or Bigfoot or whatever. And sure, I mean, it's a tool that can be useful to that. But in an actual clean remote viewing experiment or process, it should be done against actual targets for which the viewer can be presented also with feedback. So it has to be a real target for which you get feedback. And there's a core reason for this. It's because the viewer, in order to actually improve or even know if they've succeeded, you have to be able to confirm for them what the target was once they're done. Okay, here's some examples of remote viewing results. This is after a series of pages and a number of sketches that start off very simply and eventually morph through the session. This was the final sketch that the viewer arrived at. This is one I did, so I know exactly how this happened. I had no clue what this was, but as I went through the remote viewing process, it became clearer and clearer to me what this, how this should look on the page. And I sketched this as my final result, and you can see that it matches pretty well. Some of the best remote viewing sessions will have these really clear, obvious results. That doesn't mean that you can't have a successful remote viewing session and the sketch not be dramatically like the target, but that there's a lot of explanation going on there. I won't get into that for now. Here's another example. This was a clay model. As you can see, the target was this open pit mine, and the viewer created this concentric ringed structure out of clay as they're going through the process. They said, well, it's like this. It's got these rings that go down, and it's actually a pretty nice representation of it if you think about it. Not all remote viewing results are picture perfect, as I mentioned. So for example, you see this one. You see what the target is. Is it? Hang on a second. Let me fix my phone so it doesn't ring anymore. Should have done that earlier. So anyway, you can see the target is this bridge. It's got these arches that go up and there and down. The viewer, blind to the target, sketched, said, this is land over here. This is land over here. This is water. This is what they thought it was a platform floating on the water, did have stanchions or a railing along it. And they just felt compelled to do this arched shape here. And when I was talking to them afterwards, they said, I had no idea why I put that arch in there. It was just like I felt like it belonged there. And so they sketched it in. Now, this isn't a great sketch. This is not something that just miraculously looks exactly like the target. But you can certainly see the family resemblance. And a lot of remote viewing results are like this. They are somewhat distorted versions of the actual target. They may have things out of place. There may be things that aren't supposed to be that are, and vice versa. Misinterpretations, which I'll address that in a little bit. But you can see it definitely is still has this very strong resemblance to what the target actually is. Let me turn my phone off too. Somebody really wants to get a hold of me. John, that isn't you, is it? Dang it. There we go. Okay. Some of them are very literal, but they don't look like it when you see it to begin with. But then when you see the feedback, you'll see, oh, right. So this is another session I did. I thought this was an owl or maybe some kind of, some kind of animal. And this I thought was a shaving brush, but my subconscious knew what it was and proceeded to guide me in how I made the sketch. And you can see it's very literal. I just didn't get the interpretation of it right. Some remote viewing results are both visual and verbal. So for example, this particular session, the remote viewer did sketches that, there you can see that it's kind of a dome-shaped thing with these vertical sort of openings in it, big rectangular doors and vegetation around about, and then wrote a summary about it. So let me break this down. So first of all, what they said was that this target was domed, had multi-levels, repetitive square rectangular shapes, cream color outside. Inside there were lots of colors: gold, yellow, red, blue, gray, and green. It was constructed of wood and stone. Light was shining through colored glass. The structure itself was ornate, contained art, was historical. There were two large, prominent wooden rectangular doors. People here associated with the target had flowing clothing with head drapings. And she had an impression of seriousness, respectfulness, deeply felt feelings. She felt it was a holy place. So if you all were here in the room with me, I'd ask you what you thought it was. I'm sure each of you have a speculation as what this target might have been. I'll show you. It was Ettal Monastery in Germany near Oberammergau. And you can see that her sketching was really quite remarkable. She got the trees in the right place. She got the stairs in the right place. She got these are a little bit rounded, but pretty much they're tall and thin. Got the windows right around the dome. She got the doors right, if I didn't say that already. It's really nicely done sketch for considering that she had no idea what the target was. She was working totally blind, just working off of the cue that she's given, which is just an arbitrary number. So a little bit more about it. Here you notice this is the front door, these large rectangular doors, lots of art inside. There's stained glass in various parts of it, so light coming through colored glass. Yeah, it's very ornate in here. So that was a very nice description, an excellent remote viewing result. Some remote viewing results are mostly graphic or kinesthetic, though. Kinesthetic means that you create it with your hands, just generate a model or whatever, a clay model. And you see, this is a really great one. This one's done by Tom McNair, who was one of my colleagues at Fort Meade and arguably one of the best practitioners of controlled remote viewing that we've ever had. So there are a number of kinds of remote viewing. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but the one I teach and the one that's kind of the granddaddy of most of them out there is a form called controlled remote viewing that was developed by the original creators and developers of remote viewing. There are a bunch of offshoots of that. There's a variety of those that they're kind of like descendants, if you will, of the original controlled remote viewing. There's a kind of remote viewing called extended remote viewing, which a number of folks practice. This is more of a meditative form of remote viewing. There's a group in Hawaii Remote Viewing Guild, who have their own fairly unique kind of approach to remote viewing. And then there's what I call GRV. I've heard this also called freeform remote viewing. It's really the kind that was practiced originally, which means everybody who tried remote viewing was just kind of doing it trial and error. They didn't really have a particular method that they learned. And so each one of them developed their own kind of approach to it. So that kind of gives you a general flavor of what's out there. Controlled remote viewing actually is quite structured. It consists of 6 stages or steps. I'm not going to go through these, but I'll show you an example of a controlled remote viewing session. This is one I did. And I just put the whole thing up here so you can see what one looks like if all the pages assembled in order. You start off with just getting a very brief concept of the target. Then as you go along, you get more and more detail. At a certain point, you start trying to sketch it. And if you note, the sketches tend to morph. And you'll see what the result or the actual target was here in a minute. But it starts off as kind of just sort of a bunch of layered structures. This was drawn on its side. So it's vertical here because it's arranged the way the rest of these. Then again, this is one I did. I had this impression that, no, this isn't quite right. It's more round and kind of tall. Then I felt like that's a little too tall. And then I did it and it's a little kind of smaller around, and that wasn't quite right. And then I did this one. Okay, that felt a little bit better. Starting to get AOL of a Coliseum or some kind of sports facility. AOL is mental noise, your left brain guessing what it might be. And this was my final sketch. And then I wrote a summary about it, which kind of gathered all that information together. Okay, so that's what we would call a stage 3 controlled remote viewing session would look like. This is okay. So we bring the sketches together, the final ones, and that was the target. It's the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing. Interestingly, when I did this, I had not followed the Olympics. I'd been, I don't know, somewhere, and I wasn't paying attention to them. I had no idea what this was or what it looked like. As I'm sketching it, I'm feeling like there's all these kind of lines on it, but I couldn't really quite capture what those were. I did know there were other structures around about, and you see them, scattered around here and about around the stadium. And what was interesting was on this, when I did this sketch, I just felt compelled to put little, I didn't know what they were, like a fuzzy thing with a trail coming off of it. I wasn't quite clear what that was. Turned out the tasking was to remote view the Beijing Bird's Nest Stadium on the opening night of the Olympics during the fireworks. So I even apparently got the fireworks in on this without even having any clue that's what I was doing. But this gives you an idea about how a CRV or controlled remote viewing session goes together and how it looks when it's done. All right, there are challenges for remote viewing. The first and probably biggest one is fear of failure. Maybe not the biggest one. It's an important one though. Fear of failure, and on the other side, there's a flip side to that, desire for success. That actually gets in the way of most remote viewers' progress at one time or another. You really don't want to fail. You really want to succeed. And the harder you try to not fail, the more likely it is you're going to fail. There's a very interesting kind of a dynamic or even a paradox going on here. You have to be fully willing and completely accepting of the possibility you're going to fail before you can succeed. I refer to this as the Zen of remote viewing. It's very much that you focus on the process and you don't worry about what the outcome is going to be. And if you can achieve that state, which is a very Zen-like state, Zen notoriously, or famously, maybe that's a better word, Zen famously wants you to focus, to pay all your attention on how you do things, how you do it, and let the outcome go until you get there. Like Zen archery, it's all about how you draw the bow, how you knock the arrow, how you breathe, how you release. The target is the last thing that you care about in Zen archery. And that's the way it is in remote viewing. You have to learn to not worry about whether you're going to get the target or not, but rather how you go through the process. And if you master the process, if you do the process properly, you actually will end up getting the target, describing the target, perceiving the target. It's really an interesting kind of dynamic. So anyway, fear of failure is the first issue. The second issue is a thing called mental noise. Anytime we do anything, we've got all this racket going on in our brains. We've got memories, we've got speculations, we've got guesses, we've got desires and wants and things that conflict with what it is that we want to do. And when you're being psychic, it's very pronounced because your left brain, to speak very loosely here, your left brain always wants you to give the answer. That's its job. It's to give you the answer. It's supposed to analyze the information that comes in your normal daily life. When you start trying to be psychic, where the bandwidth is even lower than it is in everyday life, your left brain starts trying to jump to conclusions about what it is you're perceiving. You end up with these wrong guesses that we call those analytical overlay. There's other elements of it as well, but this is all mental noise. And if you don't learn how to control it, it can really get in your way of perceiving what the target is. In fact, oftentimes when I'm doing interviews and things, the interview host will want to know, well, what is it you teach people when you teach them the remote view? And I tell them there's three things. The first thing is to recognize the signal. Okay. Now the signal is actually very subtle, as you can imagine, in a psychic sort of an environment. The signal is quite quiet and quite subtle. And so it can take a little bit of experience before you start to recognize it, but there are things that I tell my students that help them. The second thing I teach them is how to recognize mental noise. There are characteristics of this mental noise that's going on that if you learn how to recognize them, you can start parsing out that from the signal. And then the third thing they learn is how to tell the difference and how to manage the difference between the signal and the noise. But mental noise is a big problem, but it can be dealt with up to a point. You just have to learn the process. And of course, it sounds simple enough. That's where, of course, all the work is learning to recognize the signal and learning how to deal with the mental noise and how to then tell the difference. Okay, so here's an example of some mental noise going on in a session. So the viewer got, this is also another CRV session. The viewer got the number, the ready, set, go number, and went through the early process of this, started getting sensory impressions, and hopefully you can read some of those. I'm not going to deal with those right now. I'll give you a little summary at the end. And then started drawing sketch, and they drew this sketch, okay? And they thought about this while and said, that's just not quite right. And then they redid the sketch, and you notice here, they made them think of a cable car. This is an indication that they recognized that there was some mental noise going on. Cable car was that mental noise. So they're excluding that by writing it down and getting rid of it. But they sketched this. They realized from the first sketch, let me go back, that it was some kind of a bridge. Target was some kind of a bridge. From the second sketch, they thought, no, it's more like this. It is a suspension bridge. They felt like it still had towers, and this was, of course, water. Then they said the target is an expansive structure. It is broad. You got impressions of gray and dark clay red. There's water present. It makes me think of a suspension bridge. Okay. Well, in fact, that's exactly what it was. It is dark gray red. It is arched over. It is a suspension bridge, although not in the way that they were thinking it was at this point in their session. And but still, that's pretty good representation of what it is in general. When you compare it to this, though, you see there are minor elements in here that are correct, but this kind of misses the boat, if you will. This is what I would call mental noise. This is analytical overlay. The left brain recognized that there was a bridge, and then it recognized a few elements of it, and then it tried to put it together in a way that just wasn't accurate. And that's the thing we struggle with in remote viewing all the time. Okay, final thing is, that I want to talk about in terms of challenges is this idea that it's a fragmentary process. Remember, I mentioned video in the head before. Well, the problem with the video and head thing is it assumes that you get a full image picture all at once. And you know, people, if they don't know what remote viewing is, will often say, well, remote viewing, am I not going to see just a very clear image or picture of the target? And the answer is no. It's remote viewing, but it is viewing in a fragmentary kind of way, plus all the other sense perception modes are involved as well. You can hear, smell, taste, touch, as well as see, but it's all kind of fragmentary and jumbled up, and you have to learn how to sort that out. That's part of the learning process. So let me illustrate how the fragmentary part of the process works. When you just first start out, you get bits and pieces of the target. This is another one by Tom McNair, and these sketches were early on in the process. He's just kind of feeling how the shapes are. As he gets deeper into the session, and I'm not showing you all the pages here because that would take a long time. This is about 20 pages long. As he gets deeper in the session, the shapes kind of come together. The dimensional nature of this target starts to coalesce. The bits come together, if you will. And then they start to, the relationships between them become more evident. And then it becomes more refined, even can kind of draw a sort of a map of this target. From there, then he goes on to a more refined sketch. From there, he goes on to making this model. This is one of those three-dimensional model targets. It was funny because he said, well, there's a whole bunch of these, but I don't make them all. So I'm going to make one, and I'm going to make dots where the rest of them are to save himself a little work. But you notice he's got these three towers. He's got this round tower in front, buildings in between. This around the side, he said, is a road, but he couldn't make it flat because it was clay. Anyway, when it all came together, this was the target. You note the water tower out here, the 3 towers here, the buildings in between. He didn't get them all, but he got at least an indication of them. And then the substation back here with all of these towers. Okay, this is an awesome, awesome result. But it does show you how it starts off in bits and pieces and how it then kind of coalesces and comes together. Okay, so where did remote viewing come from is a question. Now, it has some antecedents fairly past in history in the past, but in modern times, it originated with a man named Ingo Swann. He was doing some research about the same time as Lloyd, probably. Well, I don't know when Lloyd was out there, but Ingo was working with some of the same people that Lloyd encountered. He did some work for Carlos Osis at the American Society of Psychical Research. He worked as a research subject with Gertrude Schmeidler at City College in New York. And but he was not your passive kind of research subject. He was a bit feisty, and he was a little bit annoyed about some of the protocols they were using. He just didn't feel like they were maximizing the potential that a human psychic could achieve. So he came up with a protocol that actually was the basis of what I mentioned earlier about the remote viewing protocol, the rules that you needed to practice. Now, you went beyond that, though, and came up with a couple of actual experimental protocols. One of them is what we call outbounder, which is where one person goes to a target that's selected randomly. The remote viewer stays back in a secluded room, doesn't know where that other person went. It could be 2 people, not just one, I guess, or 3, whatever. An outbounder team goes to that location. The viewer has no idea where they went, but what he or she does is focus his or her consciousness on the location of the people that are acting as the beacons, essentially, that have gone to that location, and then perceive the setting that they're in. It worked really well, and that became the basis of the remote viewing research later on. Okay, so he created remote viewing. He even also came up with a term for it. Here he is. He was an artist working as an artist at the time in New York City, and here's his masterwork called Millennium. It's now in the American Museum of Visionary Art in Baltimore. So if anyone lives out there, they really ought to go to the American Museum of Visionary Art and check it out. They've got, I think, 5 of his paintings there, including this one. It's really, really amazing. All right. So the people who then coalesced around Ingo, in a way, were Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann. They did an experiment in 1972 that was successful. Again, I won't go into the details of how they got together, but that experiment got the attention of the CIA, because the CIA had been researching Soviet involvement in what we would call paranormal research. The Soviets were spending literally hundreds of millions of hundreds of millions of dollars a year in their currency equivalent to the US dollar. And the CIA didn't know why, but they also knew the Russians didn't tend to throw away money, so there must be a reason for it. And so they were worried that they needed to find out what the Russians were up to, the Soviets, I guess, really were up to. And so when they got word that these two had done an experiment, and Puthoff was actually working in a highly classified research facility that supported the U.S. government, it still is called SRI International. The CIA figured they could get him to do the research. And so they built a program around Hal Puthoff. Ingo, of course, still associated with it. And then a few months later, Russell Targ came in. Now, this is a picture, I don't know, not too long after this one was taken on the right. And this is Russell on the left. This is Hal on the right. And you can see why I often talk about them as being the Simon and Garfunkel of the remote viewing world. Anyway, so they were the core of this program. In 1982, Russell left the program, and Hal kept on as a director until 1985. And let me see where I go next. While all that was going on, that says 1984, by the way, on the right. In 1979, the Army decided to get involved. Actually, in 1977, but the program went live in 1979 with F. Holmes Skip Atwater as the primary mover in this program. He was actually tasked by a two-star general to create a remote viewing program in 1977, and they did their first remote viewing sessions after they'd recruited sources and done their research in 1979. And we worked out of these old buildings here, this one here and a matching one across this little road that you can't see here. That was our headquarters. I joined in late 1983. This is Tom McNair. You've seen a couple of his sessions now. Bill Ray, Ed Dames, myself when I had hair and whereas it was somewhat skinnier, and of course Ingo Swann. And this is Charlene Schufelt, who was one of our number as well. So we were trained by Ingo Swann to do CRV and continued on there until, until 1995. I left in 1990. All of us here left at differing times, and others came in to replace us. But in 1995, the program was shut down. What happened was, I don't know if I have a slide about this. Okay, so in 1986, let me do my slides here. In 1979, it started going operational. 1984, we were trained and we continued to work until 1986. Early 86, the program was transferred to the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Army got out of the business and DIA picked it up. Worked at DIA until 1995, when when Congress decided that the CIA should be the one running the program. Well, here's the problem with that. The CIA didn't want it. The director at the time, Robert Deutsch, I think it was Robert, might have been John, I forget. Anyway, I keep going to look that up and keep forgetting to remind myself, but Deutsch was his last name. He was the director and he was adamantly opposed to remote viewing. I don't know exactly what role he had in canceling it, but the program was canceled literally to the day the CIA acquired it. You may have heard that the CIA had a report done that investigated remote viewing in its use in the intelligence community and concluded that it was of no use. What you should know about that report is that they didn't even start doing the research and start writing the report until the month after they shut the program down. So they already had decided to shut down before there was any such report done. They just did the report later to kind of justify what they did. And I won't go into the details here, but there are a lot of reasons why that report is actually very faulty analysis, and actually its conclusions are not trustworthy. But I guess since the CIA did it, you're not surprised. Okay, so when people say, remote viewing, in military doing remote viewing, that sounds kind of like this kind of a deal. Somebody with a crystal ball telling you where to aim your artillery or whatever. It's not exactly like that, but I will show you some examples of how we used it. So for example, this project was done in 1986 for the DIA. The target turned out to have been, this was another one of mine. You know what, I did these sketches and I said this reminded me of a MIRV. Now, MIRV is essentially a multi-headed warhead for a ballistic missile. And in fact, that's exactly what the target turned out to be. I had been targeted on a Soviet MIRV, multiple independently targetable reentry vehicle, a multi-headed warhead, and had actually captured the basic nature of this thing. Another one, we were actually targeted on the stealth aircraft program, not because we didn't know what it was, at least in terms of the US government, but because we wanted to find out what Russian remote viewers might be able to do. And it was kind of scary because, as you see, we did do a fairly decent job of capturing this thing. There was actually two of them. And even the descriptors, the verbal descriptors about low radar signature, the special skin it had, which it did and does, and so on. We viewers and nobody in the remote viewing program knew about the stealth program. We were tasked completely blindly on it. And as you can see, the summer of 1987, we got our feedback when the stealth aircraft was, the existence of it was declassified in the middle of '88. So we opened up the papers and said, oh, look, that's what we were doing last year. We recognized it as soon as we saw it, but we weren't told or anything. We did not know at the time what it was. We're just completely blind. This is a Soviet phased array radar. You can see what the actual thing looks like. We have photos of it now that the Iron Curtain has gone down. This was my sketch of it over here. Used it in counter narcotics. Lots of stories I could tell there. I won't go into it now, but this is an example from one of our sessions. They wanted to know where on a container ship the contraband was, and this ship used dowsing, remote viewing and dowsing together to capture where in the cargo it was. It turned out to be correct. They did recover contraband at that point on that ship. And I want to mention time is no obstacle. I think I'm running out of time here, so I better be quick. On 15 May 1987, I was asked to do a remote viewing session. The tasking was something along the lines of describe for us an event that's going to happen in the near future that would be important for us to know about. And you can think of this as a kind of a psychic fishing expedition. They didn't know what the event might be, but they sort of thought there is always an event. What's the most important one for us to know about in the future? And so I got these coordinates. This was my ready, set, go number. That was what I just mentioned the target was, an event in the future. I got these sketches. It reminded me of a flight deck on a destroyer. And so I'm going, okay, well, that's interesting. I sketched this, which also looks like this, whoops, too far. The superstructure of a destroyer, you can tell. I called it a structure at the time. I didn't want to commit to it being a vessel of some kind. And then these are directly from my session. So I got this impression of an aircraft off in a distance and a ship. It was the middle of the night, but it was in an area surrounded by land that was sandy. I mean, it was a big body of water, but all sides were surrounded by sandy land. And then I got the impression the aircraft dropped something, an object. It was a cylindrical object made out of metal, and it made a guttering, rumbling sound, kind of a steady guttering, rumbling sound. Started off distant, then it approached. The aircraft dropped it and left. People on this vessel notice the object, and they have the sense of, oh no, this is unreal. We can't believe this is going on. And this object kind of aimlessly in a way seems to kind of go like this, and then it comes together with where the people are. And this structure or vessel shivers, shakes, and quivers. And there's this loud chang and screech, metallic squeal, and then the vessel cants, in other words, tips, goes out of line, sags, and twists. Okay, it's like the structure was altered in some way, crumpled or bent. The people were angry, they were consternated, if you will, confused, chagrined. So the main points: large gray vessel sailing at night in body of water surrounded by sand. Lone aircraft flying in the distance. Aircraft drops a long cylindrical object with short stubby wings, which emits a roaring, guttering noise. The object flies around aimlessly for a while. Then the object and the vessel come together, and it causes consternation, smoke, and mayhem. Okay? Happened at night in a body of water surrounded by land. The attacking aircraft was originated from a base near the water, and it was directed by a semi-professional military in a third world city that was farther inland, in here somewhere. Okay? I'm presuming you guys can see my cursor and all that. All right. So this was Friday. My monitor I had provided a session that he didn't think was right. He thought I was off. He said, "Oh, Paul, you're off. Well, let's go home for the weekend." So I put that in my safe drawer, the session in my safe drawer, and left. Monday morning, I get a call from Skip Atwater. He says, "Paul, where's that session you did on Friday?" I said, "Well, it's in my safe drawer. Why do you care? I was off." He said, "You haven't seen the paper this morning, have you?" So I got out my copy of the Washington Post, and I proceeded to read exactly what I had said in my session 50 hours before it happened. This was really amazing. It was the best session I ever did before or since. It was as close to 100% accurate, I think, as you can get in a remote viewing session. All right. You can see the aftermath. This was taken a day or two after the attack. You can see what happened to it. A year later, I got to read the after action report. on what actually happened and match it to my session. Absolutely correct. So even time is an obstacle in remote viewing. So I'm short on time, speaking of time, so we'll just wrap it up there. Mainstream science, if they ever stop to listen to what the evidence is that we have to present, may well have a reaction like this. Okay. Why is remote viewing important? I don't want to discuss this right now. I want you to think about that, and maybe it can come out in the Q&A. We'll see. All right. So for further information, you can get my book, which is aimed at introducing people to remote viewing at a very basic level, although there's even stuff in here for people who've been around a long time. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at its website of guidetoremoteviewing.com. Here's my website. So, John, I guess it's back to you, or not?
Oh, sure, Paul. You're not getting away that easy.
Yeah. So should I stop share now?
If you want to stop your share, we can come back and we can talk to each other a bit.
Okay, good. All righty.
So there were a couple questions that were coming up. By the way, thank you very much. It was a great overview and a background on the topic and really good insight into the different methods. If someone wanted to learn remote viewing, like someone was asking about stage 3 level, how long would it take them? Does it take a couple of hours, a couple of weeks, a couple of months?
A couple of months. Yeah, bring your meals in, right? No. At stage 3 said, like the one I showed you of the Bird's Nest Stadium, I'd have to go back and look at the actual time hacks. You put a starting time and an ending time, but that probably took me maybe half an hour, maybe 20 minutes, something like that. So a stage 3 session, if you're really tuned in, shouldn't take you more than about 20 minutes to half an hour in general.
So that's to perform the session. But
Yeah.
and I saw a video of you where you did a show where you taught someone remote viewing in an afternoon.
Right.
And yeah.
That's
How
very
long does it?
rudimentary level.
How long would it take to actually learn to do that level of remote viewing, though?
Okay, so to the level for example, what I did with the stage 3, I just finished a class literally about 3 hours ago, which started on Monday at 9 and finished whatever that was, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever it was, my time. And they weren't quite to that level yet because it's really only 5 days into it. But if they are diligent about it and do some practicing, within a month or two, they could be doing pretty consistently if they really concentrate on the process.
So you're saying you taught this class, it was a week-long class?
Yeah.
And then if they continue to practice, they could get to that level.
Yes, I teach them the process and give them, well, this guy had 14 sessions, I think. I teach them the principles and I give them 14 opportunities to put them into practice, right? Plus we do a lot of exercises and we even have a couple of field trips that relate to this and so on. So yeah, that's a good start. That's a really excellent start. In fact, that is enough of a start if they then are diligent about practicing and putting the principles that they have learned, reinforcing them and building them in.
So someone was asking about ethics in remote viewing.
Yeah.
And has it been or can it be used for nefarious purposes, for sinister reasons to do evil? And is there a way to kind of shortcut this or protect
the first thing
against
is,
it?
what human behavior can't be used for nefarious purposes, right? Of course it can, just like anything else, right? And that's why we have ethics. If there's something if we couldn't use our talents, our abilities, and our various behaviors and stuff to perpetrate frauds, to abuse people, do whatever, we wouldn't have ethics. We wouldn't need them, but we can, so we do. And in fact, like a number of these things, you can have a code of ethics. It's not going to stop people from misbehaving. So there's no way to guarantee somebody won't go off the reservation with remote viewing. But accept education. We try and tell people, IRVA, for example, the International Remote Viewing Association, has an ethical code, how people behave. And certainly I do. I mean, I won't do, some people sometimes want me to remote view what their girlfriends were up to, right? No, I'm not doing that, right? Some people want me to find so-and-so. And they say, oh, no, that's fine. I just needed to get in touch with so-and-so. Nope. You know, that I don't know if they want to be found. And so I'm not going to do that, right? So at any rate, ethics are important, but ethics require that the person know what the ethics are and follow them. And that's about all you can do.
So there are a whole bunch of questions were coming
Yeah.
through about associated remote viewing. But before we get to that, there was a question about the government report that dissed the remote viewing program. And was any of that based on religion?
No. So there's these rumors that have been started actually by some of my colleagues that there are these fundamentalists in government positions and they rejected it because they had religious scruples against it. But actually, I found exactly no evidence for that. And I asked Hal Putoff about it, who was in a position to know. I've asked some other folks. And even some of the ones who made the claim, they couldn't actually quote me chapter and verse of when and where it happened. I think it's mostly rumor. However, what isn't a rumor is that actually the so-called scientific skeptics, they were a major problem. The end of the program in 95 was caused partly by that. And there were numerous times throughout the history of the thing from 1972 all the way up to 95, where people who are skeptical of it tried their best to undermine it and get rid of it. So that's where the real flack came from, was from people who had skeptical reasons for scientific or whatever to not want to have the government involved in it.
And so not religion in kind of the classical sense, but maybe people who were religiously scientific or skeptical.
Yeah, scientific religionists. Yeah, that's true.
Materialists.
So, I do. Yeah, materialists, exactly, or physicalists, as I call them. But the fact is actually that at Fort Meade, a number of us were religious and stayed religious. So, for example, I'm a practicing Mormon. There were other practicing Mormons there. Some of them, well, they had other reasons to have issues with religion, but we had a number of Catholics there, and they were all very committed afterwards. Had a few Protestants who were able to manage it with their religious background as well. And of course, there were some who struggled, but generally speaking, it isn't necessarily a butt heads with religion. It all depends kind of on how you interpret religion and how you interpret remote viewing, right?
So again, I want to get to the ARV, but this same question has come up a number of times today, and I hadn't gotten to it. So I want to ask you because I think it applies here.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people who are now seem to be teaching what they're calling blind sight. Well, it's not blind sight, but extraocular vision, I guess, is what they're calling it, where they blindfold people and are able to see from a distance. Is this at all, or is it similar to what remote viewing is about?
Well, first off, they don't see from a distance. Whatever it is they're seeing seems to have to be right there in front of them, right? Which has made me suspicious about it. Now, I was really skeptical of it for a while before, but some things have come up that make me less skeptical about it. But whether it's remote viewing, whether it's even being psychic, that's a different question, because there is this phenomenon, I don't know how well it's been attested, but it has certainly been looked into, called, and I may get this wrong, but I think it's electrodermal vision or something like that. Dermal vision. People, well, they'll be able to they put something on their stomachs, on their skin, and they can see it, see it, whatever see means, right? Others talk about other ways, like they're blindfolded, but then they wave their hands over it, they can see it, whatever that means. I don't know much about that. I just know there have been claims about that. Maybe it is a form of ESP, but the fact that the object being observed or being reported, like the book they're reading or whatever, has to be in their immediate vicinity, at least in most of these cases, that makes me think it's probably not remote viewing, because remote viewing, you can see clearly the other side of the planet, see in the relative sense that remote viewing means. I think there ought to be more research done about this. I only know of one scientific study into this. Maybe there's more, but I only know of one peer-reviewed study, and 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 it wasn't even actually in the exact model that these folks are using. I would love to see an independent, scientifically based research project done on these to see what it is exactly that they're doing. Well, they may not be able to get to know what they're doing, but be able to control very carefully to guarantee that there's nothing going on other than what the claim thing is, and then see how that turns out. I'd love to see some serious research done on that.
I agree. It's a phenomena that I've been following for a year or so now and really
Mhm.
been looking at it. And it's something when I first saw it, I was like, wow, if this really it seems like it's legit from
Mhm.
what I'm seeing. But if something I'd really like to learn
Yeah, right.
and then
Yeah,
study
yeah,
it. It
yeah.
just sounds very interesting. Um, so now let's get to associative remote viewing.
All right.
Question is whether remote viewing has been used related to business or in
Mhm.
finances.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Of course, the question is, if you're psychic, why aren't you rich? And the implication of that is you're psychic, you should know what's going to happen in the future. Okay, well, that's not necessarily true. That's an assumption, right? That being psychic allows you to predict the future. Now, it turns out that there is at least some ability to do that, right? We do have that capability. So far, the most reliable one is what we call associative remote viewing, which, in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about the model. They can look that up. I have a good description of it on my website, for example. It might be one on the Rhine side. I'm not sure, but um, then good. Put a link to my website. No. So anyway, um, it has been quite successful. It doesn't work all the time. No remote viewing works all the time, but there are a number of actually peer-reviewed published papers documenting successful ARV projects, which you predict either how a stock is going to perform in the future, or how a sports contest, what the outcome of a sports contest is going to be in the future, so that obviously you can monetize it by betting or by buying or selling the stock or whatever, right? Um, yeah, it's been helpful. It's been useful. People have made money. People are making money right now at it. It's got some landmines in it. I mean, there's some problems. One thing called displacement that I won't explain right now either, but that is kind of the really annoying thing about it, because everything works and you do a really great description. It turns out to be the wrong target. Anyway, there's these things that are happening, but overall, ARV seems to be a successful paradigm for actually investing in the in using ESP essentially.
So we're kind of out of time here. I have two
Yeah.
more very quick questions. One,
Okay.
you're gonna be at the conference, right?
I will be popping in and out. Yes.
Mhm.
I won't be
So
speaking this time. I just didn't have time to get it together. I'm sorry, but I will be popping in and out as time permits, and you
mm,
probably have an assignment or two for me even.
oh, I
So
definitely have some work for you to do, Paul, and we'll definitely have you a part of it. And the
yeah,
final thing I wanted to, so people can ask questions of you while
sure.
we're at the conference. The final thing I want to ask you, just very quickly, is the government still doing remote viewing or psychic spying?
So my general response is no, and that's based on some very good reasons. During the global war on terror, some mid-level government folks would actually hire or ask remote viewers to do projects. So there was stuff going on during that time period, but the government itself was not doing it. The fact that they had to go out and hire remote viewers, freelance remote viewers, tells you the government didn't have its own program, right? I and Hal Puthoff in 2002 were actually approached by a second tier CIA official and asked what it would take to set up a program. At that point, you know that they didn't have a program, or they wouldn't have had to ask, right? Now, um, and I don't think that changed, because if they were going to set up a program, Hal and I would have been the ones that would most plausibly be involved in that, right? Um, but there's possibility that one agency does have a program. That's the NSA. They were involved in it back a long time ago, back when I was involved in it. Um, how big their program is, nobody knows. There are rumors that they're still doing it, but that's not been verified. So I only say might. It's possible they're still doing it. I don't think it's likely at all. And I know the military services aren't. It's unlikely that CIA or DIA are, but there's a slim chance that maybe NSA is. I don't know.
Paul, it was remarkable. Thank you very much for all of your time today. And Lauren, thank you so much for organizing everything.
Yeah.
And Lauren, over to you.
Say,
Thank
so
you.
let me ask one thing. Normally when these things go away, the chat goes away. I'd love to see what people were asking that I didn't get to answer. So if it's possible to save that chat so I can take a
Well,
look at it.
here's an idea I actually have, Paul, is first of all, which room do you belong in this convention here? Because we have these rooms that are going to be set up throughout the conference.
Yeah.
And one of the ideas I have, it takes a little work, but we may kind of filter through these chat rooms and then invite the speakers in one of these rooms and continue these questions that we didn't get to, and then people can continue to ask. And that will be kind of like John, as we said, more spontaneous because there's that stuff. So that's one of the things that we'll do, and it depends on the speaker. Sounds like you want to do that, so we'll start with yours. We'll go through the chat, and we'll look to schedule a convention room for you during the 23rd to 31st, where we can continue to ask these questions. So that would be great, and everybody that's part of the conference will have access to this recording, so they can watch it before or after as well. So the answer is we're going to look into it for you for sure.
Okay, thank you.
I want to remind everybody they can go to the ssc-pa.healthyseminars.com. That's the website. Early registration rate ends Sunday, end of day. So if you want to save on the registration, register right now, definitely before midnight tomorrow. We'd love to have you join. The recordings from today will show up on the Educational Day page on the SSCPA conference website. So they'll be available until the 23rd for anybody to watch. Then after the 23rd, they won't be available unless you are part of the conference. You've registered, and then it'll still be available to you. We'll have live events from the 23rd to the 31st. And then anything that we've recorded, we'll make available to you on demand until September 15th as well. So lots of opportunity to network and to learn. And again, thank you to the SSCPA for putting this conference together, like organizing the material and inviting Healthy Seminars to be part of it from the online perspective. And check out those two organizations, the Society of Science Exploration, do check them out, and the Parapsychological Association. They have student memberships as well. So two great organizations. And then a big thank to the Ryan Educational Center. Thank you guys for sponsoring today's free educational day. Much appreciated.
Thank you all. This is great.
All right. Thank you. All right, everybody, take care.